Hey guys, Studio T here. Today we're going to talk about the Snowshoe Companies of New England and the duties that they performed during the French and Indian War. I'm going to give you an overview of the equipment and clothing that these New England frontiersmen, the Snowshoe Companies, would have used and worn. And I'm also going to give you a brief synopsis of why the Snowshoe Companies were originally formed and what their purpose was. So, to start off, it's 1704. Local native tribes of Deerfield, Massachusetts, all summer long, have been preparing and planning a raid on the town in that winter, which would come in January. They've been making winter moccasins, they've been making snowshoes, all kinds of equipment for not only themselves, but for the English captives that they're going to take from the town with them. So January rolls around, they launch their attack. Now this isn't necessarily a big coordinated thing between various tribes, but they all converge on the town for various, they all have their own motives. You can go to the Raid on Deerfield website and learn more about the event. It's really interesting, really cool. If you're interested in this period in history, I'd recommend you check it out because it's really interesting. But so they come, they take captives, they take to the woods, take to the hills, they run, they go. Townsfolk are terrified. They try to pursue the natives to get their friends, their families. That's their, the pastors, their townsfolk. They want to get their townspeople back. So they go after them, but they can't because it's New England in January. So there's about 2 feet of snow on the ground, and the townsfolk are helpless in their daily wear, whereas the natives and the captives are equipped with nice snowshoes. So they're just making snow hairs across the snow. So they say, we got to do something about this because hostile native tribes are becoming more of an issue. We need some way to protect ourselves. So they rounded up the best New England frontiersmen, the best woodsmen in the area that they could gather, and created the Snowshoe Companies. And they are named as such because they were equipped with the snowshoes of the time, so that in the winter they would have the same technologies and abilities available to them as the natives did do at the time. And during the French and Indian War, their purpose was to not only protect the perimeters of New England frontier towns from hostile native tribes, but was also to go on long scouts and watch out for the French, who were also around at that time. But so they would go on these long scouts, couple weeks at a time, out in the woods, just kind of being security for these frontier New England towns. Some of the equipment that they would have needed and had with them: weapons. This is probably one of the most common types of muskets at the time. It is a doglock musket, 76 caliber. It's a pretty big round, used for both solid shot and buckshot. The reason it's called a doglock because prior to where half-cock on muskets and rifles were a thing, they had something called a dog. This piece of hardware right here, that's called a dog. That's why it's called a doglock. When you're thinking about proper weaponry for frontiersmen, militia of the time, whether you're talking about French and Indian War or even the Revolutionary War, if you're not military and you're a commoner, like frontiersman or militiaman, the kind of weapon that you would have would be something that's 30 or 50 years old. So you're not looking at technology of the time, you're looking at technology that was prevalent 30 or 40 years earlier. So like the doglock was around late 17th century, early 18th century. So by the 1740s, 1760s, 50s, a frontiersman would likely be able to get his hands on one of these pretty easily. Other kinds of weapons would be steel. They were encouraged to bring knives, hatchets, or hunting swords with them because when you ran out of shot or you're being rushed by the enemy and you don't have time to reload, they're likely going to have some kind of hand-to-hand combat weapon on them. You should have one on you as well. So here I have 2 knives on me. A smaller knife for more crafting and woodworking type tasks. And I also have a larger combat style knife here, which this is more of something that you would pull if you're being rushed by the enemy. It's a nice big knife, pretty light, pretty easy to maneuver, just not easy to put back into the sheath. Ball bag and powder horn is where you kept your lead shot. Is where you kept your gunpowder for your musket. Pretty self-explanatory there. Down there. Canteens. There was many different types of canteens used at the time. This one here is a copper one made in a kind of flask-looking design with a handmade leather cover and a strap, as well as copper and metal canteens. They'd also have ones like these, is redware, so it's ceramic with a leather cover. They'd also have glass bottles that they would use as canteens. Same principle, you put a leather cover over the outside, protect the canteen from getting cracked or broken, because things like pottery and glass can be quite fragile if it's knocking around the woods with you. So there's this, and they'd also use gourds. They'd hollow out gourds and sometimes treat the inside with beeswax and make a carriage for those, and those would be types of canteens that they would also use. Haversack. Food, extra supplies, what have you, usually made out of linen, like this one here, or sometimes even leather bags and haversacks were used. Generally, you want to stay away from 3-button haversacks, because 3-button is usually more of a military type design, because if you're a frontiersman that's looking for more practicality rather than uniformity or style, you only need 2 buttons to close a bag. So 3 buttons is fairly unnecessary, but obviously this one has 3. Oh no, I'm a farb. Not really, but you want to try and steer away from 3-button haversacks if you're not mainstream military. Just a burlap strap there. Belt rig. So obviously I have my knives on it. Here's a kind of belly bag for extra supplies. Basic primitive closure, stick and leather loop. Brass and pewter buttons were just as common, if not more common. This is a pretty primitive style that buttons would have been preferred because they're easier. Things you keep in here: hemp cord, candles, flint and steel kit in a leather bag. Just little stuff that you may need. Some people keep rounds in here at the reenactments. I don't. I just keep wood supplies in here. Leather belt, basic leather belt, brass buckle. Brass buckles and iron buckles were most common. Archaeologically speaking, all that really ends up popping up is brass, because brass survives underground longer than iron. But it's ridiculous to think that they didn't have iron buckles. So iron or brass is appropriate for belt buckles, and just basic square ones like that will do fine. Leather jerkin, performing the same task or the same function as the ones that the British used in World War I. Keeps weather off you, keeps you a little bit drier in the winter. It's good as a windbreak, which is why I'm wearing it now, because it's cold and it's winter. Wood buttons, quite a few of them. Pretty basic design. It's the pattern similar to that of the waistcoats of the time, kind of flared, frocky back. Frock coat is a nice thick wool, faded dark blue frock coat. 7-inch cuffs. That's as big as they would be. These can button down and wrap around your hands to be a little bit warmer. That's not the primary function of the cuffs. It's more style than anything. But for someone like me who is a snowshoeman, practical function is always a plus. Wood buttons, nothing too special there. This particular one is quite long. If you can kind of see that. It's quite long. Good for protecting your legs from gusts of wind or snow. Take this off real quick. And one thing with clothing for the snowshoe companies and even New England militiamen of the Revolutionary War later, they're pretty well known for wearing sad or muddy colors. So stick to blacks, browns, tans, even kind of dark blues like that are okay. Linen shirt. It's a woven striped linen shirt, nothing too special there. Linen brown waistcoat. This one's pretty beat up. Basic design, pretty common for the time. Wool breeches, they're tan. The button fly is more of a Revolutionary War period style. Normally in the French and Indian War era, you still would have had either the flap or even just a drawstring closure, like the sailor slops, some earlier. Full gaiters, knee leggings. These are oil-painted canvas with pewter buttons. These are great for protecting your legs from brush and things ripping up your socks. And then, let's see if I can show you these without falling over. Moccasins. These are made in the Algonquin style of the time, the local Algonquin tribes in New England, because they were the Englishmen were trying to use their own technologies, the natives' own technologies, against them, because they realized it worked and it was very practical. It's where the knee leggings and the moccasins and snowshoes come from, as well as other things. So I'm going to put this back on because it's cold today. But other pieces of equipment. Oh, Monmouth cap. Just a wool knit cap. You'd more often be wearing something like this in the winter because it keeps your head a lot warmer than, say, something like this, which you might wear at any other point in the year, which is just a felt broad brim hat. Even tri-corners were worn, but this is a lot more practical. Keeps the sun out of your eyes, keeps the rain out of your face. But these aren't very warm during the winter, so you wear the Monmouth cap. Also, mittens. Basic mittens, mink lined, leather exterior, pretty basic. If you're going to be on snowshoe scouts in the dead of winter in New England, you need to have some warming layers there. Mittens, scarves, caps, things like that. In addition to the blades, other weapons, hunting swords. It is a hunting sword. It was more of a style, fashion at the time, late 17th century, early 18th century. It was still quite popular with a lot of people, and some guys carried these as well as the hatchets and knives as secondary weapons. Knapsack, linen bag to carry your blanket and other goods that you may need on a scout. Either one of these or a blanket roll, but in the winter, for longer scouts, you would sometimes see the woven fishing baskets or pack frames like this, which isn't, all the stuff isn't tied to it, so it's kind of just sitting there on top, the tarps and everything. But there's a basic wood frame pack design. They'd ever had the woven baskets or these, because in the winter you're going to need to take more equipment with you than you would during the summer, because it's colder out, elements are more against you. So here there's a oil painted canvas tarp, big tarp, use it as a shelter. A bit of black bear fur for added insulation underneath you when you're sleeping. Oilcloth. This you would have had on you year round. Use it as a poncho, ground cover, gear covering. This one has a little head hole with a flap to use as a poncho. But oilcloth was a very, very useful thing. It was the rubber of the day. It was used for a lot of waterproofing methods. Other than that, on the pack frame, it's just a wool blanket, some cooking implements. It's actually a squirrel cooker, but squirrel cookers are a reenactorism. And you can see the basic construction of the frame. Neck stocks, linen neck stocks. This was a style that was pretty popular during the time, but you would not wear this on a scout. You'd wear this when you weren't working. So if you're out in the woods or on a scout, you wouldn't wear one of these. It was a fashion statement. It was a fashion piece. Other types of leggings, as well as the oil canvas ones. In the summer, you might wear leather ones. This is solid piece, no buttons. Or even in the winter or summer, probably more in the winter, these are thick wool ones. Again, one piece, no buttons. Sometimes they would be lined with things like mink. These used to be. And yeah, that's it. That's pretty much all the basic equipment and gear of the Snowshoe Companies in New England during the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War period. If you want to learn more about the Snowshoe Companies, I would recommend going to Harmons Snowshoemen website. I'll leave a link in the description. A lot of really nice stuff down there. Really well-written articles. You can learn about gear, purpose, more of the history of the units. And, yeah, that's it for now, guys. Comment, rate, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.